things that are shown here. I won't be testing you at the end. But essentially, an ideal imaging system is what you get in 3D computer games. You go into a computer game and you can turn around and look up and down and move around. The technology, the equations, the mathematics that goes into a 3D computer game is the same sort of mathematics you need to understand photographs, or ideal photographs. No camera's ideal. It's made out of real pieces of glass and you have to make some trade-offs. But an ideal system, you have basically this projection plane like a window. Microsoft would like us to call it a window. You've got a window on the world which is flat. This is the ideal case when it's flat. And you're looking through that window from your eye. Just take one eye at a time. You're looking through that window at the world, at that blackboard and the roof and so on. And basically the way that that window image is obtained, and this is how they do it in computer games and all 3D graphics, is they project all of the points of the real object in three-dimensional space through to your eye, and where it hits that projection plane, that's basically your image. You can see here you're looking at it sort of through the middle, and so you get two squares, the front on the outside and the back on the inside. So you can understand all imaging systems mapping the 3D world onto a flat 2D plane, flat 2D sheet of paper if you like, in this way. So what's important is you've got an eye position, you've got a direction of view, right, which goes straight through the middle of that plane, and you've got this plane, this flat sheet. Okay, that's the basic idea. So as you look around, or as you turn your eye, but I'll move my body, okay, you're moving, the direction and the plane are moving with it. One tool that I use to analyse the film is the ability to change the direction of view, almost like a computer game. That you can take an image. Now what I've done is taken one of the ones you saw from Jack's presentation, photographed by the Dallas Police Department some days after the assassination. Jack says it's Monday, Gary Mack says it's Wednesday, but Gary Mack confirmed it was from the pedestal, so that satisfied me. Taking this image, which we'll come back to in a moment because it'll be important to us, if you understand the distortion in the image, and this one's not too bad in distortion, and you understand how far things are away, so you've got some idea of your field of view, so if you know your camera or you do some measurements, you can actually change the image to look to the left. Right now we're looking right down the middle of this image. You can simulate looking to the left and looking to the right, looking up and looking down. Okay? You can't bring in any more image from here. We don't know what's over here, so this will move and nothing will come in. It'll just be black. But you can, I'll just show you how that works. You can look to the left, you can look to the right, back to the middle, you can look down and you can look up. And what you have here, you want to do that? Is that as you look to the left and that image moves around to the right, you notice these lines are coming down like this, okay, to a vanishing point. Those of you that are artists will know how vanishing points work. All parallel sets of lines in a certain direction go to a vanishing point. If you change your direction of view, all the vanishing points shift. So as I look to the left, this building, all those lines go to a new vanishing point. As you look around to the right, it keystones in the other direction. And as you look up, as you look down, of course the building looks like that. And that's why some professional photographers had to use perspective correcting lenses in the past, and now they do it on computer. They can correct the perspective. Okay, so these are the effect of perspective or changing the direction of view, which is really the same thing. Excuse me. For an ideal imaging system. So that's one of the tools that we use to look at the film. There's some trade-offs for real imaging systems, like all of these cameras and the projector. There are trade-offs. Some of the things you minimise, and you'll see this word in a moment. Chromatic aberration just means coloured fringes on things, basically. If you have a really poor lens, like you get someone in a high school physics class to design a lens, if they do coloured objects, they'll probably find that it's got coloured edges on things. And people don't like coloured edges on things. If you've got a white line, you don't want it to turn into 3 different colours, or the whole spectrum of the rainbow. Some overhead data projectors are very bad on this. You notice the 3 colours, or the overhead, the 3-gun TVs are bad. So you want to minimise this sort of thing. You want to minimise loss of focus, which are spherical aberration and coma and astigmatism, which is changing the shapes. You want to minimise those sort of things because people don't like the edges of the photo to be blurry. What you normally do in most lens systems for high quality objects, and you've got to understand this optics has been understood for hundreds of years. They've been grinding glasses and telescopes and so on. So it's really an art form, but it's also well understood in terms of the mathematics and the physics. Going back to Isaac Newton, essentially, in some of its aspects. It's not a joke. He had a book on optics. It's understood since Newton's time. The compromise usually is that you allow a small amount of pincushion distortion or barrel distortion, depending on what sort of lens system you're creating. So you want to get rid of these things that really look bad, coloured edges, loss of focus, but you don't mind if the image is a little bit distorted. Perfectly in focus, colour's perfectly sharp, but the whole image is a little bit distorted if you really look at it closely. This is a photograph that Jack took last year. It's his 5th photograph. I'll show you in a moment how they were all used. But just as an example photograph with a few vertical things in it, just a run-of-the-mill photograph, and I'll show you what pincushion and barrel distortion are. That's pincushion distortion, and that's barrel distortion, and that's back to the original photo. So pincushion distortion is pulling the corners out like a pincushion, and barrel distortion, which you may have seen if you have a wide-angle lens on your camera, or a fisheye lens, it's even worse, or even some digital cameras and some video recorders, some camcorders allow you to do a fisheye effect because it looks sort of funky and kids like doing it. You get that barrel effect. So there's the barrel. You notice things in the middle are basically unchanged. Everything's stretched. It's like a piece of rubber. The whole thing is stretched. These parts are sort of stretched and these parts are stretched the most. And vice versa if you're doing a barrel distortion, squashed in. Notice these things are bending a bit. Now normally the effects aren't as drastic as here, but I wanted to show you how the effect works so you know what I'm talking about. The actual effects in the film are much smaller, but they're still of the same nature. Just quickly, barrel distortion. An example of barrel distortion is if you're short-sighted and you have spectacles, eyeglasses, and you might have noticed if you do wear glasses and you're short-sighted that up in the corner, right now that light over there is in the corner if I was wearing my glasses, and the corner sort of brought in. Okay, things are not in the right position as you go across the edge of your glasses, as long as they're strong enough. And so it's typically for concave lenses. You notice your short-sighted glasses are like that. If you hold the glasses up, it tends to shrink things, not like a magnifying glass. It does the opposite. Typical for wide-angle lenses, you get that sort of barreling. Pincushion distortion is, as you'd expect, the opposite. If you're long-sighted, you use those terms here, don't you? Short-sighted, long-sighted? Right. Far-sighted, near-sighted. Okay, so this is the opposite case. You've got convex lens, and if you hold it up, it magnifies, which is what you're trying to do with a telephoto lens. That's just a rough overview, but when you put all the lenses together and you try and do some optics and try and come up with a lens system which minimises everything, this is typically what you find, that for things that magnify, telephoto lenses, you tend to get a bit of pincushion distortion, and wide-angle lenses you get the barrel. If we now look at the Zapruder camera, which I'm again looking forward to disassembling one, arguably set on maximum telephoto zoom, and Rick took some some frames with his particular camera, which is the same, essentially the same model for the optical properties, and the well, I mentioned that as well. The frames he found within a fraction of a percent. There was a slight discrepancy, but I was prepared to pay the Zapruder camera on that one, that it seemed to be about the right zoom level, and the zoom also agrees with the lens system. If you do detailed measurements, they all agree. These Zapruder film frames, as I'm going to show you shortly, all of them tend to agree with this setting. There's no, it doesn't look to me as if there's any change in zoom. For this camera, you do expect a little bit of pincushion distortion, and in the, I think it's in the Zapruder report, is that right, David? The patent for the Zapruder lens is one of the attachments. And so you can actually look it up. It's a little bit difficult to decipher, as most patents are. Patent is 63, but of course applied for in 1959. So this is the one in the Zapruder camera, and it goes through many technical things in a very highly abbreviated way that the patent office uses. But the important thing, these things are highly corrected. I mean, this was a very good camera for 1963, probably top of the line home 8mm movie camera as far as I can tell. And so this zoom lens was important enough to have its own patent, and all these things are highly corrected over range of focus and a range of zoom, which is, I wouldn't like to design these lenses if it was my job, because there are so many. If you look at the next page of this in the Zapruder report, it's very daunting in terms of how many parameters you have to control. But the important thing is here, distortion also is highly corrected, but it's slightly compromised, about 3.5%. So they're giving a figure in the patent for this lens system, which is in the Zapruder camera, about 3.5% of distortion. What I did when I was made aware of the distortion of the film, it's a little bit hard to know before you start that there's going to be how much distortion there's going to be, because you need to understand what's in Dealey Plaza. One way to measure it is to use the observation that if you do have that ideal imaging system, any straight line in three-dimensional space, like the edge of that blackboard or that straight line, that straight line, that straight line, if you have an ideal imaging system, those straight lines will be straight on my image. Okay? They won't necessarily still be parallel, they have vanishing points and so on, but straight lines on an ideal imaging system will stay straight. And of course that white wall in the background that goes up into the distance to the peristyle is straight in Dealey Plaza. And you know, I actually got to smack it and walk along it in the last few days and confirm that it is straight. It's dead straight, and it should be straight. If there was an ideal camera, it should be straight. So what I did is measured many points along the wall and grunted through some mathematical equations, which would probably give you a heart attack, and figured out what this distortion parameter was for the film frames that I had. And it was equivalent to 3.6% at the corners of the frame as it was designed, not in the sprocket hole, because that wasn't. 3.6%, so that seemed to be consistent with the patent, and suggested that we had a good understanding of the distortion. This is an example of the pincushion distortion, and this was probably one of the frames I actually used. It's fairly clear, and the wall is towards the top of the frame. You see a fair bit of it, and hopefully this projector's quite good. But this blue line here has been put on using Photoshop digitally. It's perfectly straight, so if it doesn't look straight to you, it is straight. It's just the distortion of this gadget that might make it not straight. And you notice this sort of bends away from the edge. There is another sort of line that goes along the wall here which bends away from the blue line as well, which is why I put the blue line there. And you can see, because one effect of pulling the corners out is that you bend lines. You don't just make things bigger and smaller, you actually bend straight lines as long as they're not just going straight through the middle. And that provided that measurement I referred to. So in the raw frame as you have it, after you fix up MPI's mistakes, it's not straight. When you correct the distortion, now it's straight. Okay, so there's the raw frame as you get it on the Zapruder film. You do the pincushion distortion, now it's beautifully straight. And once you determine what the distortion is for the camera, that applies to the whole film. You don't do it frame by frame, you do it just once. Zapruder's camera had this particular distortion coefficient, and you put it into the computer, and you can do this for every frame and just set it running overnight and correct all of the frames in this way. And that's how I created those frames at the start that I showed you in the film. Another example, frame 389, just as an example. Now this isn't quite as clear-cut a case because it's we're talking about Main Street. Main Street, if you look from above, is straight. If you look from the side, well, the slope might change slightly, but over one Zapruder frame, it's essentially straight. It's essentially straight. In fact, even Elm Street is almost straight if you look at one frame, because it's so tightly zoomed in, it's essentially straight. And again, if you notice here, these, well, all of these parts of Main Street are sort of bent, and if you apply the same correction that you determined elsewhere in the film, remove the distortion, and now it's pretty well straight. There's a very slight variation because it's not a wall that's been measured with a ruler, it's a road that might have a slight variation in its slope. But you notice also that Elm Street becomes a little bit straighter. It doesn't bend around so much, and in fact if you go to the middle of the film, the limousine doesn't bend as much. You might have noticed that the edge of the limousine, some of you that have studied the film for a long time, the limousine's got a bit of a bend to it. When you correct the distortion, it's basically straight. Okay, there's rounded edges on the limousine, but it looks just a little bit more realistic. So again, these are things that are correct about the film. So we understand the pincushion distortion and pretty well established that. The second question is whether we really understood the geometry of Dealey Plaza, okay, the three-dimensional geometry. If you don't have an understanding of that and a way of measuring that with mathematics and measurements, both as a plan and in terms of height, then it's very hard to compare things with other photographs or even with modern day measurements. So that was the question. I think it was a bit of a challenge that someone put out there. Can you make a panorama of Dealey Plaza today that covers the whole plaza as seen from where Zapruder took his film? So July last year, Jack very kindly went down to the Zapruder pedestal and somehow managed to get up there with a tripod and took 16 photographs. You helped him get up? Or you took the photographs? He took the photographs. I don't know how he got up. You lifted him. I don't know how he got up there, but 16 photographs basically on a tripod, 10 degrees each time from the Zapruder camera position. I'll take these off so I go. And the challenge then was, all right, here's the 16 photographs, stitch them together. If you think you know what you're doing with the mathematics, with the three-dimensional geometry, with the computer, stick them together. I don't know if you gave me that challenge, did you, Jack?
I couldn't do it.
But there was a bit of pressure on from other quarters once Jack posted his photographs. So I just wanted to show you the photographs that he took so you can understand the difficulty in putting together a panorama. Other people have done it. Scott Myers did a good one, and I think some other people maybe here have done one. The difficulty you have is that as he moves 10 degrees around each time, the angle, and you can see